Hello. My name is Luna. I was born in 1956. In a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, back when people still wrote letters by hand and left their front doors unlocked. I was the youngest of 4 children, and the only one who dreamed in blueprints. While other little girls played with dolls, I sketched buildings on the backs of napkins and cereal boxes. My father once told me, "You're either gonna build skyscrapers or tear them down." I chose to build. By the time I turned 30, I had co-founded a real estate firm with my husband, Charles, a Vietnam veteran with a laugh so loud it could shake the walls. We built the company from nothing, just a 2-person office with a squeaky fan and a phone that barely worked. But we hustled. We made calls. We chased deals. We survived 3 recessions, 2 betrayals, and 1 citywide scandal that nearly wiped us out. Through it all, we stood together. In 2002, after decades of work, we purchased the crown jewel of our lives, a 5-acre estate outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It wasn't just a house. It was the physical embodiment of every sacrifice, every late night, every risk we ever took. A white colonial-style home with wraparound porches, oak trees that whispered in the wind, and a library with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed my books in morning light. Charles named it West Haven. It was his way of saying we had made it home. When Charles passed away in 2015 after a short but brutal illness, West Haven became my sanctuary. The world had gotten louder, faster, colder. But inside those walls, his warmth still lingered in the creak of the stairs, the groove of his reading chair, the garden he planted for me in 2004 that still bloomed in spring. I had enough money to retire comfortably, and I did quietly, without fanfare. I joined a local book club, volunteered at a women's shelter, and taught financial literacy workshops at the community center. Life was slower, but it wasn't empty. It was thoughtful, earned. Then came Ethan, my only son, the boy I once rocked to sleep during tax season, who used to draw on my contracts with crayon. He had married a woman named Claire, a sharp, poised marketing executive from Seattle. I had my reservations. Claire was always polished, always polite, but never quite present. You know the kind of person who smiles without smiling. That was Claire. After Ethan and Claire had their second child, they asked if they could move into West Haven temporarily, just until we find a place of our own. Ethan said, "You'll love having the grandkids around." And I believed him. At first, it was wonderful. The sound of little feet running down the hall. Claire baking banana bread in my kitchen. Ethan setting up a home office in the den. I told myself, this is what family's supposed to feel like. I even began to think maybe I needed this noise. Laughter. People. But slowly, things began to change. Claire started rearranging furniture without asking. Ethan began managing the household finances, saying it was easier for him to consolidate the accounts. My library was turned into a playroom. My bedroom lock disappeared. One day, I came home from the community center to find my garden had been dug up, replaced with a trampoline. Still, I said nothing, because that's what you do for family. Right, you make room. You compromise. You bend. Even when it hurts. You tell yourself it's just a phase. You bite your tongue and smile, until you forget what your own voice sounds like. I didn't know it then, but I was already losing something far greater than space or furniture. I was slowly giving up ownership not just of my house, but of my peace, my rhythm, my place in the world. And the worst part, I didn't see it coming. Not yet, but I would. And when I did, I would learn the hard way, Sometimes the biggest theft doesn't happen with a crowbar. It happens with a smile, a thank you, and the words, "We're just here to help." It started with the small things. That's always how it starts. Doesn't it? Claire began handling the mail. She said it was because she was better at sorting through the junk. But soon, I noticed some envelopes were missing bills. Bank statements. Letters from my lawyer. When I asked about them, she would say, "Oh, must have tossed it by mistake." Always with that soft, composed voice. Always with that same smile. Then came the passwords. Ethan updated our home Wi-Fi and said he'd simplify things by connecting all the smart devices to one account: his, the thermostat, the security system, the cameras, even the front door lock. I didn't complain. I told myself it was convenient. After all, I was retired. Technology wasn't my strong suit. I figured this was just the new way of doing things. Then I found myself locked out. It happened one Saturday morning. I had gone for my usual walk around the block, nothing unusual. But when I returned, the keypad on the front door blinked red. I tried again. No luck. I knocked. No one answered. I called Ethan. But my call went to voicemail. When I finally got inside through the back door that a neighbor helped me pry open, Claire looked at me like I had overreacted. "You must have put in the wrong code," she said, handing me a cup of tea I didn't ask for. "Don't stress. Luna, you've been forgetting things lately." That was the first time she said it, forgetting things. But it wouldn't be the last. She started using that phrase more and more. "You forgot to turn off the stove. You forgot we had a school pickup today. You forgot we already talked about this." At first, I brushed it off. I was in my late 60s. Sure, but I was sharp. I knew the difference between forgetting something and being made to question your own reality. Still, her voice was always calm, always gentle, like she was doing me a favor. And Ethan, he just stood there, nodding. Eventually, I began doubting myself. I stopped attending my community classes. I forgot to renew my volunteer schedule. I stopped driving at night. Then altogether, my world, once wide and rooted in purpose, began to shrink room by room. I stayed in the kitchen more, or the guest room Claire set up for me just for comfort. My own master bedroom, where Charles and I once danced barefoot on hardwood floors, was being repainted. Claire told the kids it would become Mommy's meditation space. Mommy, not Grandma, not Luna. I stopped being a person. I became a placeholder. One night, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. The door was cracked open just enough. "She doesn't even notice the changes," Claire said. "It's like she's slowly checking out." Ethan's voice was tired. "I don't know. Claire, maybe we're pushing too hard. She's old." Ethan, "She needs help. We're not doing anything wrong." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding like a slow, heavy drum. It wasn't what they said, it was how they said it. Like I was no longer in the room. Like I had become a liability. The next day, Claire introduced a new system, just to keep track of things. She said, a notebook with columns labeled meals, meds, mood. It sat on the kitchen counter, with a pen attached by string. Every night, she filled it in, rating me like a case study. I wasn't angry. I was confused, then numb. And somewhere in the middle of all that confusion, the garden died. Charles's garden. I hadn't even noticed at first, because Claire had planted new turf and paved over the soil. She called it simplifying the landscape. The day I realized it was gone, I sat on the porch and cried for the first time in years. Not because of the roses or the apple tree. Not even because of Charles. I cried because I couldn't remember the last time anyone asked me how I felt. Not what I needed. Not what I forgot. But how I felt. I was disappearing. Piece by piece. And the people who were supposed to protect me, the people I raised, loved, trusted, they were the ones tightening the noose. Gently. Kindly. One little thread at a time. The scariest part wasn't that they took control. It was that I had let them, and I had no idea how to take it back. The night everything changed started like any other. Claire had gone to her friend's charity dinner. Ethan was working late. I was alone in the house again. My house? Or at least, it used to be. The rooms felt colder now. The lighting softer. Like a hotel where no one really lived. I sat by the window in my old robe. The one with Charles's initials stitched faintly on the collar. Sipping tea I didn't really want. Staring at the front gate I used to walk through every morning with purpose. And then I saw her. A girl maybe 11. Maybe 12, standing outside in the rain. Soaked. Shivering. Holding something in her hand. At first, I thought she was a neighbor's child. But as I opened the door, she didn't flinch. She stepped in slowly. Eyes wide. Holding out the object. It was a wallet. Ethan's. She said she found it 2 blocks down. Near the bus stop. Lying in the gutter. She was quiet. Polite. Said her name was Kira. Lived with her aunt nearby. I thanked her. Offered her a towel. Even made her cocoa. Something about her reminded me of myself, curious. Sharp. Kind. She asked questions. About the house. About the paintings. About the garden that used to be there. And for the first time in what felt like months, I spoke freely. I told her stories. About Charles. About the rose bushes. About the first Thanksgiving dinner we hosted in that house. With a burnt turkey and laughter that still echoed in the walls. She listened. Really listened. Not the way people do when they're waiting for you to finish. When she stood up to leave, she turned and said softly, "You should write these things down. If you don't, who will remember that night?" I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the meals. Meds. Mood notebook. Claire had written. Luna seemed distant today. Forgot the name of her old friend. Refused to eat quinoa. None of it was true. I remembered Elaine perfectly. And I didn't refuse the quinoa, I just said it tasted like cardboard. Suddenly, something cracked open inside me. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. The next morning, I woke up at 5:00 a.m. I pulled out an old legal pad from the drawer. The one I used to keep near the phone. I began writing. Not like a diary, but like a record. I wrote down what happened each day. Who said what? What I ate. What I felt. Not for them, but for me. So that I could see clearly, in black and white, whether I was really losing myself or just being erased. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more. Claire began questioning me in front of the kids. "Grandma, don't you remember? We told you last week." Her tone always cheerful, but her eyes just a little too sharp. Ethan would shake his head, smiling, but with disappointment hiding behind it. But this time, I wrote it all down. The day Claire forgot to pick up Ava from school, noted. The time Ethan told me he paid the insurance, but the check bounced. Written. The camera on the front porch that accidentally got disabled after I tried to call a friend logged. With time and date, it was like I was building a case. But not for court. For my own sanity. And then I found the letter, tucked in the back of Ethan's drawer, behind an old tax file. A letter from a real estate company, dated 3 months earlier. An offer to buy the house. My house. The one paid off 22 years ago. Claire had signed it on behalf of the family. There was no record of my signature. No record of my consent. And yet, there it was, plans for renovation. A move-in timeline. New ownership. They were planning to move me out. Without a word. Without a choice. I sat on the porch that night, the cool air brushing my face. The streets were quiet. The world moved on, like nothing was wrong. But inside me, a storm was building. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't old. Or fragile. Or forgetful. I was Luna. And I was wide awake. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. To my attorney, to my sister in Arizona, and to Kira's school, because sometimes a stranger returning a lost wallet isn't just a kind act. Sometimes it's a mirror held up to remind you you are not invisible, and you are not done yet. The attorney's office was a small brick building off Maple Avenue. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the receptionist greeted me like I was someone who mattered. Her name was Donna, and she offered me coffee. I said yes. My attorney, Mr. Briggs, was younger than I expected, mid-40s. Clean-cut, with kind but tired eyes. He had handled Charles's will years ago, and I remembered him being thorough, almost stubborn about doing things properly. That's why I chose him now. I pulled out the stack of notes I'd kept. Dates. Conversations. The letter from the real estate company. Claire's signature. He read quietly for 10 minutes. No interruptions. Just silence. Broken only by the occasional page flip and his pen tapping gently on the desk. When he finally looked up, his voice was low but clear. "Luna," he said. "You're not paranoid. You're not confused. What they're doing, it's wrong." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "They've set things in motion," he continued. "But nothing is final. Legally, you still own the house. Any transfer without your consent is contestable, and based on what you've shown me, you have a case." A case? It sounded so strange. Like I was stepping into a courtroom drama. Except I was the woman everyone thought had already lost the plot. But I wasn't crazy. I wasn't fading. I was preparing. That afternoon, I returned home and found Claire in the kitchen, wearing one of my old aprons like she owned the air in the room. She smiled, oversweet, and asked, "How was your walk?" "Mom," I met her eyes and answered calmly. "Productive." The next day, I began taking back space. I asked Ethan to reinstall the security camera. When he hesitated, I said, "Either you do it, or I'll have someone else do it. Your choice." I started locking the drawer in my bedroom again. I kept a second copy of all my documents with Mr. Briggs, and I began seeing a counselor, one who wasn't picked by Claire. Her name was Susan, and she didn't ask me to prove my memory. She asked about my story, week by week. The fog began to lift, not because it had been real, but because I stopped letting other people name it for me. Then came the dinner. Claire had invited a few friends over. Old neighbors. A couple from her yoga class. She asked me to stay in my room, to rest. I came downstairs anyway. I wore my favorite navy sweater, the one with the pearl buttons Charles had given me one Christmas after a fight. I wore it like armor. I walked into that dining room, smiled at the guests, and poured myself a glass of wine. Claire's eyes flared. But I didn't flinch. One of her friends asked about the house, its history. The rose garden? The art collection. I told them everything. In detail. Stories. Names. Memories. I watched as their eyes softened and turned toward me. Not Claire. For the first time in a long time. I wasn't a ghost in my own home. I was the storyteller. And that terrified Claire. Later that evening, she pulled me aside. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "What you didn't expect?" I said, "I'm remembering." Loudly. Days passed. Tension thickened. Ethan was quieter. Claire snapped more easily. But I didn't retreat. I wrote every day. I met with Mr. Briggs every week. I walked through the house, touching the walls, reclaiming the halls where my laughter used to live. Then came the envelope. Thick. White. Delivered by courier. It was from the real estate company. Inside a retraction. The sale had been paused. A formal apology. A note stating that any future negotiations would require my signature. My written consent. And my presence. I held the paper in my hands and wept. Not because I'd won, but because I'd remembered who I was. Kira came by the next day after school. She handed me a paper. She wrote an assignment about someone brave, you know. It was about me. She called it "The Lady Who Refused to Disappear." I framed it and hung it in the hallway where Charles's golf trophies used to be. Because sometimes, you don't fight by screaming. You fight by standing still and refusing to be erased. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. The apology letter may have stopped the sale. But it didn't stop Claire. She went quiet for a few weeks after the documents arrived. Not withdrawn calculating. She kept to herself. Avoided confrontation. But I could feel something shifting in the walls. A tension building. Like the pause before a storm. Ethan, to his credit, stopped taking sides. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was self-preservation. But he no longer challenged me when I made decisions. He helped repair the garden shed. He offered to drive me to my counseling appointments. He even told Claire gently that I wasn't leaving the house, unless I chose to. But Claire wasn't interested in surrender. One morning, I came downstairs and found her seated at the kitchen table with a man in a gray suit. She introduced him as a financial wellness advisor. His name was Mr. Sloan. And he smelled like cologne and manipulation. He smiled at me like I was a walking burden. "Miss Luna," he said. "Your daughter tells me you've been under a great deal of stress lately. Managing a property of this size alone can be overwhelming. We specialize in helping families like yours transition smoothly into the next stage of life." I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, "Mr. Sloan, let me stop you right there. If you're here to convince me to sell my home or hand over power of attorney, I suggest you finish your coffee and find another family." Claire stood up. Furious. "I was just trying to help you." "Mom?" "No." I said, "You were trying to finish what you started. And you brought a stranger into my house to do it." The next day, I called Mr. Briggs. I asked him to draft a legal declaration affirming my ownership and decision-making capacity. We submitted it to the county records office and made it public. The house, the land, and every structure on it were officially undeniably mine. Claire didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. During that time, I took back more than just paperwork. I went into the attic and pulled down boxes she had stuffed away. My wedding album, my mother's letters, old photos of the kids when they were little. Before life got messy, I redecorated the living room not to erase the past, but to honor it. I took down the bland canvas, Claire had hung and replaced it with a portrait of my grandmother that used to hang in our old house. I opened windows that had stayed shut for years. The air started to change. Kira visited me more often. She'd sit by the fireplace while I read or baked or just told stories. She once asked me if I was afraid of being alone. I smiled and told her, "No. Honey, being alone is peaceful. Being erased, that's what's terrifying." Then came the night Claire lost her temper. It was over something small. I had rearranged the bookshelves. And she snapped. Accused me of being reckless. Unstable. Not thinking clearly. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply handed her a copy of the legal declaration. She tore it in half. And I let her, because that was the moment I saw her clearly, not as my daughter, but as a woman terrified of losing control. And I no longer needed to fight her on her terms. That weekend, I invited a few of my old friends over for brunch. People I hadn't seen in years. We laughed. We told stories. They asked where I'd been. And I told them the truth. I had been buried under a story someone else was writing for me. But now I was back to writing my own. The house was filled with warmth again. With sound. With light. Claire moved out the following week. No dramatic speech. No apology. Just silence and the thump of boxes in her car. Ethan stayed behind, quietly packing a few things. He came into the kitchen and placed a mug on the table, my favorite one. The one Claire had accidentally thrown out months ago. Somehow, he had saved it. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. And when he left, I didn't cry. I made tea. I sat by the window. I looked out at the yard. The trees I'd planted with Charles. The garden I'd kept alive. And I smiled. Because sometimes the greatest victory doesn't come with applause. It comes with stillness. It comes when the house is finally quiet, and the silence belongs to you. Fall turned the maples golden, and sent crisp air through the open windows. I spent most mornings walking the edge of the yard, coffee in hand, touching the fence posts like they were old friends. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. But peace, I've learned, doesn't always arrive without a test. One Sunday afternoon, while sorting old files in the upstairs study, I found a letter wedged behind the filing cabinet. It was dated 6 months prior, sent from a small legal firm downtown. My name was on the envelope. But the letter had never been opened. Inside was a petition from Claire, filed secretly before her apology, requesting the court grant her emergency conservatorship over my estate. My hands went cold. It was never just about stress or concern. She had laid the groundwork long before our first confrontation. I could have gotten angry again. Could have called her, demanded an explanation. But something in me had changed. The Luna who had once second-guessed herself, once wondered if she was being too harsh, too emotional, too resistant. She no longer lived here. So I did what she never expected. Nothing. I tucked the letter into a folder labeled Truths I Carry. That week, I joined a local storytelling circle at the community center. On Thursday nights, we'd gather in a room that smelled like old books and cinnamon. And people strangers at first would take turns sharing memories. Some painful. Some hilarious. Some mundane. When it was my turn, I stood up. I didn't speak about Claire. I didn't speak about betrayal or documents or court petitions. I spoke about my grandmother's kitchen in Ohio. About the way she used to hum when slicing apples for pie. About the radio that always played Billie Holiday. About how, even when the world outside was dark, that small kitchen glowed like a lighthouse. When I sat down, someone whispered, "You should come back next week." And I did. Week after week. I shared pieces of myself I'd forgotten I still carried. I was no longer just Luna, the woman fighting for her home. I was Luna, the girl who loved books, the mother who still missed her husband's terrible jokes, the neighbor who once organized a chili cook-off just to meet new friends. Then one evening, near Christmas, I was closing the front gate when a car pulled into the driveway. Claire. Alone. She stepped out in silence, holding a small red box. I didn't come to fight, she said. I nodded and opened the door. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd once brought a lawyer to push me out of my own life. Now she sat across from me, nervous, older than I remembered. I saw your name in a local newsletter, she said. They mentioned your story group. Your name, your story about Grandma. I didn't even know you remembered those details. I remember more than you think, I said gently. She placed the red box between us. I found this cleaning out my storage unit. It's from Dad's desk. I think he meant for you to have it. Inside was a leather notebook, one I hadn't seen since Charles passed. His handwriting filled every page. Memories, thoughts, sketches of garden plans we'd talked about and never built. But what got me was the last page. A line in his steady hand, Luna. Never let the world write over your name. It's yours. And it's beautiful. I looked up. Claire had tears in her eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. I forgot who you were. I forgot who I was. And for once, I didn't need to fix her. Didn't need to protect her. I simply placed my hand over hers. You're not the only one who forgot, I whispered. But remembering, that's the start. She stayed for tea. We didn't talk about lawyers or past wounds. We just sat, watching the steam rise from our cups. And for the first time in years, I felt no tension in my shoulders. After she left, I stood at the window long after the headlights disappeared. This house wasn't just a building I'd defended. It was my voice, my spine, my story. And now, it would hold not just the weight of battle but the grace of survival. I walked to the study and placed Charles' notebook beside the fireplace. Then I whispered to no one in particular. I remembered. And I knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A quiet, powerful reclaiming of self. And the story of Luna wasn't over. Not even close.